Awesome. Welcome to day 2 of I.O., first I.O. dialogue session, coming off tons of incredible announcements yesterday, led by most of the folks who are on this stage. So I'm super excited for this conversation. My name's Logan Kilpatrick. I'm a PM inside of DeepMind, working on developer stuff, working on Gemini. So see a bunch of familiar faces from folks who were hosting in the crowd. So thanks for being here. And I'm excited to talk about all of the AI moments, the behind the scenes stories of all the launches that we saw today being made possible again by the team inside of DeepMind and across Google. We'll kick off with some super quick intros. Koray is our CTO in DeepMind, been leading DeepMind for a long time now, one of the leaders in the AI space in artificial intelligence. You're historically a research scientist and engineer, so come from that background, so excited to get your perspective today. Liz leads our search team inside of Google. You've been at Google for 22 years now, helping shepherd search into the AI and agentic era, which has been awesome to see. You also led Maps before as well. Awesome. And Josh, making I.O. happen as sort of the sort of, Josh, I think of you as like the MC of I.O. also, almost. So I think we need to codify that officially next year. But Josh, you lead the Gemini app team and and Google Labs. And Google Labs are responsible for a bunch of the product launches that we saw yesterday. So we'll see, and we'll talk more about that later today. So I'm excited for this conversation. Thank you all three for taking the time to chat. Let's start off with this thread around Koray for you, Gemini being built to be natively multimodal. We hear this story a lot. About, Gemini from the origin with Gemini 1.0 was natively multimodal. It could take in images, audio, video, etc. And I was listening to a podcast that you were on last night, and you were saying that this is fundamentally because we believe that the way to get to AGI is by having a multimodal model. Taking that at face value, when do you think about the opportunities for Google? And we had some of these that we announced yesterday where we create bespoke, independent of Gemini models. Can you talk about where the balance is between those models and mainline Gemini?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, great to be here with everyone. Welcome. And sharing the stage with all of you folks. What you said is right? Like from the point of view of building AGI and doing research in that direction, of course, that multimodality is important. Like we got to be able to get in all the different perceptive streams into the model. And it's like when we say multimodality, sometimes we think about just like video, audio, text, but it's also more than that. Like actions are there, they are important, right? So like we are thinking about like tool calls, function calls, these kinds of things that are natural for agents, models to do. Anything that is in that spectrum, like the models should be able to take them, input and output. And then like about the bespoke models, like building on this, like it is always like when you do research, it's always important that you explore something, you explore an idea, and that's always critical to do that, right? Like you need that in a way that sanitary environment to push a particular idea, figure out what works, what doesn't, and prove that. But a big part of the investment in the Gemini program has been to bring things in as quickly as possible, and of course, like it's a challenge, right? Like because like merging a lot of different threads in one model, a model that is capable of doing like coding and text generation and image generation and everything in one place. But you also start getting the effect of the transfer between those different fields, right? So I think my canonical example for this is vibe coding, right? Like vibe coding works because you have a model that understands the world so that you can really give a high-level description of what you want to see rather than a technical description of what you want to see. Yeah. And you can even do that with voice, right? You can speak to the model, say that, oh, I want an application that can do this and this and this and that. And by the way, here's a little sketch. And like, I want it to look like that. And then the model can generate that. Like that capability to me is like where everything comes together. And that's why we keep doing that, right? Like that.
Yeah, I have one quick follow-up just to rehash part of the conversation we were having backstage about, one of the announcements from yesterday was this diffusion Gemini experiment. Yeah. And it's truly a research experiment as our conversation was going through yesterday. How do you think about that as an example of where we're doing experiments versus where the mainline capabilities are going?
Yeah, that's a really exciting experiment, right? Like because like diffusion models have been around for a while. Like all the image and video generation models that we have are diffusion models, and like doing text generation with diffusion, I think it's something that the researchers in AI field have been experimenting with for a while. It's not that easy, but it has advantages, right? Like the reason we are pushing as an exciting direction is it might have its own advantages that like looking at a large chunk of output space and then to be able to in a way go back in that space and correct the mistakes and such, right? So for really complex domains like coding, this might be an advantage. That's why we are exploring that, and it's an exciting avenue. Now the job for us is like, it is exciting. I think the demo is very convincing, and we know that there is something we can get there, but we have a bunch of steps before we can comfortably bring it into the main Gemini and make it available. That's what we are working on right now.
Yeah, and one more quick follow-up to just help sort of set the context for this year's I/O and also just for the broader conversation around what's happening in AI is around scale. And we sort of had this conversation as a broken record. We're always talking about scale. There's scale of model progress and the size of the models. There's the infrastructure scale. How are you thinking about the scaling from a DeepMind perspective? If you were like, making an investment in, here's how to bucket out the scale advantage that you want to try to create. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of discussion about scale and what it means. Like when we look at model performance, there are a bunch of factors that go into that, and even scale is correlated with many of them. But of course, I think what is on top of mind when we talk about scale for everyone is the scale of the model, size of the model, right? And I think like the way I think about this is there's something that we know that we increase the size of the model, it does matter. It does better, right? Like that's a given because like you have more computational performance there. Of course, like it's if you think that is the only way to improve things, then you basically like end up suppressing all the creativity that can come. So at least I can speak for Gemini. What we try to do is have a very broad spectrum of explorations in many things. So like I try to think about like three main buckets. Like one is data. Data is really important, right? Data is not just about like getting data into the model. It's also about like there's a lot of creativity that you can put there. Like how do you get that data? How do you represent that data? What do you learn from different kinds of data streams? What is the correlation between those, especially when we go to multimodality, right? Like there's very important, exciting research there. And then there's the model architecture itself, the algorithm, the optimization methods, right? All those are very important. And in each one of these, actually, there's the scaling aspect. And then, like, the next thing that you have is inference time, right? Like when you think once you have the model, then it's the inference time. So the techniques that are in the inference time are multiplicative in a way, right? Like because you have a model that has a certain capacity at that point, but you can train it to be a lot more effective when it is being used to reason for longer, right? So there are many more areas, but these three main buckets are, I think, a good way to think about, like data, model, inference time. And like scale is one aspect of research that you can do across all, but there are many others, and algorithmic improvements are actually quite critical, and a lot of the improvements, I think, that are happening are coming from a mix of everything.
That's awesome. So I think this scale thread goes perfectly to search, Liz. And I think like search is such a great example of where you have these like really, really tough scale problems at the size and all the latency constraints. I'm curious what Gemini is enabling in search today that historically, you wish 10 years ago we would have been able to do, but we just now have the technology to actually make this possible at this at the scale actually of Google search, which is such a challenging problem.
Yeah, I think I'm now too loud. I think one thing that has been really exciting is, we started with this mission of organizing all the world's information, but for a long time, your ability to answer a question was kind of limited based on whether or not the answer to it was all in one place, right? And so that sort of forced you as a human, if you had a multi-part question, if you had 5 constraints, to basically take the question and break it up into each constraint and sort of issue like, okay, you're going camping with 5 kids and a dog and, you know, your in-laws, and here's what you need to say. Okay, then you'd be like, camping with the dog, camping with kids, camping with, right? And so you would do all of this work to break the question up because you would think that maybe nobody in the world wrote a web page just for you. And one of the things we're able to do with Gemini, we call it the query fan-out technique. We talked about in AI mode, and we use sort of a simpler version of this in AIO, in which you go and you say, okay, instead of you, the user, having to do this, the model does this. So then the model goes and says, actually, these are all of the different pieces, and it queries the web, and then it pulls all the information together. And so that ability to say, we can now answer a question as long as the information in its whole is somewhere on the web, as opposed to in one spot on the web, is really remarkable. That lets you ask a lot of harder questions, but it also actually lets you do something that I think is less obvious to folks in the US, which is that the content in various languages and in various countries is just a lot smaller than it is here in the US and in English. And so previously, your access to information was partly limited based on the language you spoke. And now with the models, you can ask the question in your language, and we can find the content in another language, and we can transform it back in a way you understand. And then if you want to continue, you can go deeper on the web using a tool like Translate to access that web page and that. And so that sense that the barriers to information cease to be things like language, I think is really incredible in opening up new opportunities for people around the world.
That's awesome. Josh, we were having the conversation this morning about the future of I/O and also just reflecting on this year's I/O and how sort of it's become very clear that Gemini is this thread that sort of brings all of Google together across all of our products in search and YouTube and, you know, for our enterprise customers in cloud and everywhere else and all the lab stuff that your team has shipped. Can you sort of give us the high level of where you think from a Gemini app perspective, the Gemini app plays in there and what the North Star looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the Gemini app, we've always been interested, and you heard us talk about it yesterday too, and what would it take to build a truly universal AI assistant? And that's been something, even if you go all the way back to the original IOs on stage, when we introduced the Google Assistant, you'll find those phrases are kind of there. And I think what's exciting about this moment is the models and the capabilities are now at a point, just like Koray was saying, and even what Liz was saying, where you can actually take a real shot at building something. We talk about it on the team that's personal, proactive, and powerful. And when we think about those 3 Ps, we want it to be personal. As much info as you want to give it, it's up to you how much you want to give it. But if you give it a lot of your other information across Google, it can do useful stuff for you. That's the personal bit. I think the proactive one is something I'm so excited about because so much of AI today is actually reactive. And so you have to ask something and then it answers. But if it can bring things to you at just the right moment, that I think is going to be really changes the whole user experience. And then I think the powerful part, I mean, a lot of you hopefully saw some of this stuff or you've gotten a chance to play with VO3. Who's played with, have you had a chance to try it in the sandbox? It's amazing, right? And I think you think about video, imagery, coding, all these things coming together in kind of an assistant that knows you, that can anticipate things, and you can kind of give it tasks to help do. That's kind of what we're going to try to take a shot at. And there's some of the stuff that landed yesterday, and we're rolling out a whole bunch of stuff over the next coming weeks.
Yeah, that's it's been wonderful to see that vision come to life, and people are really picking up on the 3 Ps. So we were also joking backstage that we need swag that talks about the 3 Ps because I think it's going to keep coming up from a universal assistant perspective. Liz, I think there's also been this broader thread about just like what an AI-enabled search looks like, and I'm curious, like getting to today, yesterday when the rollout for AI mode started to all US users, it feels like this huge step forward for search. And I'm curious just like what the behind the scenes of actually making that happen. And I have so much empathy for you and the search team because I feel like search has this incredibly important stewardship position to play in the world and can't just go and break a bunch of things because we really are the front door for the internet. So I'm curious how you think about that and also how the moment of rolling out yesterday actually happened.
Yeah. I think there's a bunch of constraints, but you can also view the constraints as space for creativity, right? And really think about it. I think one of the things we've seen with Gen AI and search is both that it can be extremely useful, but also the bar is high, right? People have a great experience with a lot of things on search. And so if you're going to bring in Gen AI, you can't be like, aha, Gen AI is cool, I'm just going to add it to search, right? Like it actually has to be, it's a better experience for people. And so we've rolled this out through a bunch of different ways. One is just like really paying attention to what really matters to people, right? So things like, is it trustworthy? How high accuracy is it? And is it helpful? Is it more helpful than the rest of the page? Latency was a big thing. There were multiple times where we wanted to roll out a bigger model on a slice of queries, and we didn't pick the right slice of queries because what happened was it was a better response, but the amount of additional time it took to respond was not worth the added value to the user. And there's not like a magic thing where users are willing to wait 500 milliseconds all of the time. It's like some things they would spend 30 minutes doing, and so they'll give you 5 seconds to do it, right? Because 30 minutes, 5 seconds is a pretty good trade-off. Others, they're like, right? You're past 1.2 seconds. I'm not going to use you as much, right? And that may sound like an exaggeration, but literally we would see people's search usage vary based on getting the quality and speed trade-off right. And so we had to work on them. Be like, okay, well, this model is too big for it, or we don't have the right slice, but we can do it for math. Okay, let's get a better model. And so we worked closely with Koray's team on trying to figure out how you get the models that maximize that. You also think about latency in multiple ways, right? Like latency is partly this question about like, can you get started? Okay, so people only read so fast, so you don't have to have the entire response available before someone to start to read. You have to have confidence that the first things you say are good, so you can't just go and be like, I'm going to start talking, oh, that was bad, let me start over, okay? And that really matters. But you want to think about that latency then of like, okay, well, what's the first part I can give you? And then I can give you additional information by the time you get there, and then it feels fluid. So there's all these little subtleties in how do you indicate it. Things like bolding, which I don't think the world, like, if you like talk to a normal person, they're like, why does bolding matter? Bolding really matters to people because bolding helps with efficiency. How quickly can you skim and find the relevant part of that thing? And so there's a lot of like both core underlying technology, but there's a lot of product craft on top of it to getting those little things that really matter to people. And so we're constantly both trying to push the boundaries on the underlying foundations, but also working to get those little things on the product that just make it feel smooth and really helpful, and that search becomes more of a delight and effortless versus like it's a chore.
To jump in quickly, like what Liz said is true. Like, I mean, all these models have been great collaboration, and we learn a lot from that as well, right? Because I think search is the greatest product in the world, and it has the strictest constraints in a way. And what you said is really true. Constraints are creativity, right? Like, in an unconstrained world, it's really hard to like choose like why do you do one thing over the other one. So we use that a lot, and then. This is actually our sort of part of frontier of trying to get higher quality, faster, higher quality, faster. And that basically what leads to models like Flash, Flashlight, and more specialized things. So like this is a great example of how we try to push technology forward, getting constraints and feedback from users and products.
Yeah, and Liz, how do you think about that relationship that search has with users in those cases where they're willing to only wait 1 second versus cases maybe where they'd be willing to wait hours? And you just launched deep search inside of AI mode, and that's sort of the experience of much longer term tasks that search is taking on for you. So how have you thought about the sort of balance between those?
So technically, we announced deep search is coming very soon,
but
not quite right yet, in case you're all looking for it. But it is something that we've had to pay attention, both from a query slice, but also how do you empower people. So AI overviews, because it's in main search, sort of has the strictest latency expectation. But we have AI mode when you want to have the more advanced thinking and reasoning, but we still assume that people, most of the time when they're using that, want it pretty fast. And then it's like, okay, you're going to go buy a new appliance for the first time in 10 years. Like, you would normally have spent 3 hours on it. You're clearly willing to wait a few minutes for sort of an expert level report, right, that gives you great links. You're trying to, I don't know how many of you have kids. Like, I have 3 kids, camp planning, it's kind of a mess. They all have like different start times. You have to, and I'm willing to wait quite a few minutes if you're going to come back with an answer that saves me hours and hours of work. And so that is really that question about, can you give people different options so that they can really choose how much time they're trying to put in a task? And can you constantly be sensitive to what is really the underlying task the user is trying to do? Because the query they come to you is sometimes the task, but oftentimes it's like a proxy for the task, or they did some amount of the work. And so if you go back and you step and say, what are you really trying to do? Then you can sort of think about new ways to solve it.
Liz, I love this example that you give around just like how long is somebody willing to wait to do something, or like how much time would it have taken them to do this? I think about a lot of tasks for me personally where I'm like, you say that like, you should spend 3 hours looking at appliances. What actually happens is I just go and find the like second thing. And I'm like, okay, this looks pretty good. I'm just going to do that. And my partner always pokes fun at me for that. So it's also like fascinating to see these opportunities where AI is doing like going far and beyond what humans would normally have done for people who aren't going to spend the time doing that. Which is just awesome.
I also think that's a great example in that like there are people who will spend like days and days double and triple checking the toaster, okay, and others who apparently do not, right? Okay, and so when you build a tool for that billions of people use, you need to make it work for both Koray and Logan, right? And it's not a one size fits all. And I think that's what's interesting about the Gemini working on the universal assistant being personal. I think that's what we're going to continue to see in search as well. We're talking about being more personal. Personal isn't just like, do you have a better recommendation? It'll probably be like, how hard do you want to work? How do you actually want to learn? Do you want to learn by audio or visual? Do you want to learn on your way home, or are you going to do it while you have 5 minutes here? And how does that change? And we just have to adapt, because it's important that the tech comes to the people and not the people come to the tech, right? Like that's what had to happen when the tech was limited, but as much as possible, we should meet people the way that they want to engage, not the way that we think is the best for them to engage.
And if I could add one thing on top of that, I think to tie back to one of the things Koray said about Gemini being natively multimodal. I was telling this to a friend the other day who's not in Silicon Valley. They were asking me, what's kind of one of your biggest surprises over the last year working on AI stuff every day? And the first thing that came to mind was this idea that content is now infinitely remixable. And just like Liz is saying, you can have a set of things that are documents that turn into a podcast, or a set of things that come in as images and videos and everything else, and it turns into a multi-step action plan. So I think this idea, especially as there's a lot of builders, I recognize a few of you out here in the audience, as you're thinking about your applications and the problems you're trying to solve for your customers, I would just try to take that as an assumption that's already mostly true today and just getting better and better and better. This idea that you can remix content and kind of weave it together. Because that's just been something I've been really blown away, how each generation of the Gemini models just keeps getting better at that. There's no end in sight from what we can see, say, on the Gemini side or the Google Lab side, and it enables all kinds of new experiences.
Yeah, on this thread of new experiences, when we landed Gemini 2.0, one of the things that was so exciting about this was that the model had native tool support. And one of the native tools that Gemini models are actually fundamentally trained to know when to use is search. And Koray, I think now we're having this really interesting moment where it's like reasoning plus tools. Looks a lot like this thing is just kind of an agent out of the box in a lot of ways. I'm curious, like the sort of balance of, from a model training perspective, like where we get the model to use tools, where it doesn't use tools, how that interacts with reasoning. Where's your head at?
That's a really important point, right? Like I think, especially the idea of like tool calls, function calls, that's sort of like the next big frontier. I think when you look around the field, a lot of progress has happened in the last 6 months on that. But I feel like we are just scratching the surface. When I think about ourselves, like a big part of our daily lives is like we use a lot of tools. We build a lot of tools, and then we use those tools. We let others use those tools. There's a world in which the models should create their own tools as well, right? Like we are just actually enabling the models to use the tools that is around. And we started with search. Like, of course, it's the natural thing. We are at Google. We have search. It's amazing to be able to use the knowledge, the freshness, the information about world that is in search, and the model trying to figure out when and how to use search, right? Like, so there's a lot of research that went into it, but now I think it is sort of, it's not perfect, of course, but like a lot of it was about like how can we, given what the user conversation is, how can we figure out a way to, okay, is this the right time to go and do a search and get fresh information or factual information from the web, rely on the search technology that has built all that information, right? And then integrate that into the response to the user. And of course, like we see the benefits of that in terms of actuality, freshness, information. And then we started more and more generalizing from there. But I think native search integration is really critical for Gemini. I think it's an important factor to be able to do that. But in general, the tool use and function calls, I think like that's really a big frontier that is really, really exciting right now.
Yeah, and I promised I would put you in the hot seat, so I've got another follow-up on this, which is around, we've had this conversation, and you've pushed the team to think of like a world where the models actually have search enabled by default. We had the conversation of like, how could we do that? What does that look like? If you had to guess, like, you know, how far away are we from, I think today DeepMind trains models and like they spit out tokens and like that's kind of the extent to what they do. I think you can imagine the future where the models look much more like systems. How far away do you think we are from a future that looks more like that versus models that just spit out tokens?
I think there's a mix there, right? Like the mix is, as you said, the models are getting to a state where like they do tool calls, they do function calls. Like we released, like with this new Flash, now we are releasing the action API, right? So like the models can do UI actions on your computer by default. It's on the API as well, right? Like we're bringing everything together. So the models start looking like an agent out of the box. But also at the same time, what this enables is this enables building really complicated systems, that you want to build a system that uses the model in different way, maybe multiple models, right? Like that capability, I think, is growing together. That's the frontier that I think we will explore a lot. Like the direction that the models will go is a lot more functionality will be embedded in the model so that it's going to be native for the model to be able to do a lot of different things, to be able to use a lot of different functionalities, your computer, your bash shell, like to be able to write code, build applications, and then use those applications and all those kinds of things, right? Like there's a whole exciting feature there. But then, like with this capability, there's the idea of what kind of systems you can build that actually help people in particular domains. I think that is coming because the models are becoming more and more capable.
I love that. Yeah, Josh.
I was just going to add from the Google Labs side on this, I think it's exactly right, where I think we were in a phase where you're having to build a lot of scaffolding around a model, and the model is over time starting to do more and more of that natively. Yeah. And I think there's a huge opportunity for kind of the tooling and how you compose some of these systems. Yeah. So I'll just give a quick example. When we did the first audio overviews in Notebook LM, that was about 6 to 9 months ago. Back then, it was an 11-step process. That was kind of an agentic system. We didn't call it that. We probably should have. But it was kind of under the hood, a way that you're able to create that podcast dialogue between those two hosts. Now, a lot of that we've been able to compress and sort of simplify because, again, a lot of that kind of comes into the model. Yesterday, we announced the models now do native audio generation out, which is, again, amazing. And it works, to Liz's earlier point, in tons of languages, too. So when you think about how you can create these experiences and kind of what that core model can do as a developer, that to me has really been interesting. And there's product approaches, even that we built 9 months ago, that are just drastically simpler now. And it is a challenge to always stay on the cutting edge, but I think that's what I would encourage everyone here to think about, is how to have maybe 1 foot in the like experimental Gemini models through AI Studio or something like that, so you can be prototyping and testing. That's what we do in labs to make sure we're always trying to figure out how to weave in these new capabilities.
And hopefully it enables like new kinds of product ideas, new
Definitely.
Products to come alive, because now the model can do more for you. You don't need to worry about that.
That's right.
Koray doing the segue for me, which is, Josh, I want to talk about new products and how Labs is thinking about this. Is perfect. That's awesome. You make my life easy. I think Labs, there's a ton of new products that released yesterday. There's a ton of historical products like Notebook LM, AI Studio came out of Labs. So thank you for making that happen. How are you thinking about this like frontier of new product experiences that can be built as the model capabilities end up landing? And like where Labs is, there's obviously a bunch of public bets. There's a bunch of private bets behind the scenes. Like how do you think about where to make those bets?
Yeah, I mean, Google Labs is just a lot of fun, I would say, because we're at this moment where there's this shift happening and everything feels like it's kind of possible in a way. I think we're trying to think about it less. There's been a generation of products, I feel like, with AI, where AI was trying to almost like bolt it on. And I think we're really trying to think about workflows and the future of where different, really, industries are going. So what does the future of software development look like? And that was yesterday. We had 2 products start to go out. One was Jules, and one was called Stitch, if you came to the developer keynote. And those are kind of our hypotheses, really, of what it might look like if you had a coding agent as a SWE, a professional developer, and what it might look like if you're starting from scratch and you just want to create a design and almost describe how the design should work with no coding background. So usually, Logan, we kind of think about an area like that. We have a bunch of very small teams, usually about 5 to 10 people, and we just go build, and we try to ship as quick as we can. We put all these experiments on labs.google. We see what works. Sometimes we have something like a Notebook LM that just takes off, and we love those moments, except our serving incapacity team that are trying to find the TPUs. And sometimes we have things that are duds, and they don't work, and we put them to the side, and we move on. And I think that's kind of the ethos of sort of trying to build a lot more in public and iterate and really take user feedback. But I would say the main takeaway on this question might just be around thinking through the workflows of your particular user type. And if it's a developer or an artist or a filmmaker or a musician, we try to co-create and get really deep with those people and understand. I always like to kind of tell our product team, try to find the things that make people grumpy. Because if you can find that, there's usually a good creative solution you can come up with. And if you do that really well, they'll pay you for it. It's kind of, so that's kind of the thought process we go through when we're thinking of different new products. But it's sort of a numbers game. I mean, we've got a couple of dozen things cooking right now. Some are public and some will be soon.
Yeah. And how do you think about bringing some of the capabilities and like the stuff that works like to other products and areas inside of Google? And I think a good example of this is audio overviews. I think that form factor works incredibly well. It's like kind of a part of Jules as well, which is the coding agent that just landed to like help. You want to explain for folks? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is a good example actually, where sometimes you bump into something and you realize, oh, this is a whole new way to create a format. In this case, like a 2-host kind of talk show, podcast style. And so kind of interesting, we built that one originally. It was very clever by the team. They built it as an API. It's Content Studio API internally. And basically, it says, give us a bag of content and we will turn it into an interesting show. And so the joke on the team is it can take anything boring and make it interesting. It's sort of how we've set that one up. But yeah, that's now gone out to search, to the Gemini app, to the Discover feed. It's kind of spread. It's in cloud. You can use it as a developer. It's kind of spread around. But I think that maybe another interesting lesson from that whole part, Logan, is that that's an example where I think we're just in this age of exploration right now. And we had no idea. I mean, when I've heard the first audio overview, I remember exactly where I was standing when I heard it. And I was like, whoa, this is something. You have no idea where it's going to go. But then you kind of follow the feedback. Yeah.
Yeah. Josh, you mentioned developers, so let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that we're enabling developers across all these products to build stuff. Liz, I think there's so many people right now who are trying to build products around this like deep search type of, or a lot of people want to organize the world's information besides Google, put a different way. And I'm curious if you have advice for people who are thinking about like opportunities to build Gemini-enabled products in those spaces, given all the hard lessons learned that I'm sure you and the search team have figured out over the years.
Yeah, I think the biggest one I would encourage is to be very agile, to be constantly playing with the tech. and to sort of not give up if you sort of have a belief. There's a lot of things in search, I think in the models, where the first time it didn't work, and the second time it didn't work, and the third, and then suddenly it worked, right? Or Josh will talk about the vision of the universal assistant. Well, a bunch of what we have now in Gemini was what we dreamed of in the Google Assistant a few years ago, and it just didn't live. It just wasn't there. But what's different now, particularly, is it's not like it didn't work 2 years ago. Maybe you should come back 2 years later. It's like it didn't work in 2.0, but maybe it now works in 2.5, or maybe it doesn't work in 2.5, but it's going to work, in the next version. I'm not going to guess what the numbering system is. I know what the next one will be.
2.6. 2.6.
Yeah.
You heard it from Koray first.
2.66.
Yeah. We have a lot of jokes about the numbering internally, externally. Anyway. But I think you have to actually play with it. You have to play with the tech and develop it. And then you have to say, is my idea just not right, or is it not right for this time? And if it's not right for this time, then you need to play with the next version. And so I think the worst cases are we're going to pour 2 years of brute force on the assumption that the frontier is here. That's actually going to be less valuable than that ability to constantly adapt and try new things. And I think if you take Josh's audio podcast example, sometimes you're adding more code, sometimes you're adding more to the prompt, but actually sometimes you're shrinking it now, right? You needed to do more. Don't just assume that the next generation is more. It's can I eliminate this step? Can I eliminate this extra data? Because now the models are more powerful. And so the more agile you are, and the more I think you actually play with both the tech and the product that you're building, the more I think you'll be able to adapt at the rate the world is adapting.
That's wonderful advice. I think we're going to turn all of these suggestions from you all into a blog post after this. But another one for developers, Koray. There's lots of conversations internally about the evals. And we're trying to find the balance of what are the right evals for us as a company building models, and for DeepMind to hill climb to make scientific progress on the models. And obviously that's challenging. Developers have the same challenge. It's really hard to know what success looks like if you're building an AI product. It's not easy to make evals. What's your do you have advice for people who are building stuff from the lens of how you would think about models if you were going and trying to build a product, given what you know from how we do it with Gemini?
That's a challenging area, especially in AI nowadays, because there are so many different things that you can follow. I can imagine that for developers, it's also hard to pick, should I use this model, should I use that model, how do I evaluate these models under different kinds of things. I can a little bit explain what we try to do, and then hopefully it translates to a lot of people. From the technology development perspective, right, we look at 3 main categories. One of them is academic evals. We look at these academic evals because they give us a little bit grounded, calibrated measure on the capacity of the model. We know that those are not exactly representative. There's a lot of actually complicated science behind them in terms of understanding how much of it is potentially leaked in different ways into the training data. So we try to be really careful there, but we also try to be understand the actual signal we are getting from those. So we use those with a lot of grain of salt, but we use those and we try to be careful there what we learn on that front. The second one is benchmarks, leaderboards like LMSys, right? And there are a couple more as well, Web Dev Arena or the scale leaderboards and things like that. Those are important for us because they are still calibrated, grounded, all the models are there, and there are real users trying real prompts, right? Of course, it's a sort of a subset. Any product, your user base is a subset of the real population, right? So the population that we get from there is of course has certain biases. They are very eager, motivated about AI. They get to compare a lot of different models. The benefit that we get is real users, real prompts, and that sort of grounded comparison across different models. That gives us some signal, right? Because those are, as I said, real-world users, real-world prompts. And then the third thing is the products, right? We work with Liz, we work with Josh and the team, and the signals that we get from there are very important as well, right? Because there we understand a much broader community. I mean, especially in search case, right? Like, I mean, a much broader user base. Like, what are people doing? What are people like really paying attention to? What are the qualities of the model that we really need to improve? Like factuality, grounding, these kinds of things, really, really important in both cases. But like, we had a lot of constraints from there. How can you push the frontier there? So like balancing those is really hard. I sort of say that there's a little bit of an alchemy in that, and that's sort of your own product motivation, what you're trying to build. I think at the end of the day, that is important because it's really easy to lock yourself into a situation that all the numbers are sort of coming at you and you don't find a way to move. And what is important is what do you want to develop, right? And for Gemini, from the model point of view, the important thing is we are still trying to build AGI. We are doing that research. So like amongst all these like signals we are getting, also it's really important for us to always remember that we are trying to build AGI, we are trying to push a technology forward, and investing in those areas that we believe in is quite important, right? So that's the balance. And I think one of the main things that I would say for developers is like finding that mode that you have, that like what is your product about, and always remember that you have to try something because like you are trying to get the users you don't have right now. You don't know what they are looking for, and they don't know that you can provide it.
Can I add one?
Yeah,
thing?
please.
I think it's really important to periodically step back related to that and ask how good your evals are giving you direction, right? You know, I once was with an engineer who gave this one, which is like, a lighthouse is really good at getting you close to the island until you get too close to the island, and then if you keep going towards the lighthouse, you go away from it, right? And so you actually really have to be thoughtful about this because the evals are always proxies for what you're really trying to build. And if you get too focused on just going after that eval and you forget that it was a proxy, then you can be too focused on the proxy and not the product. And so you constantly, I mean, not constantly, but regularly should step back and say, is this pushing me forward? Is this eval as hard as I need it to be? Is it reflecting how people are changing in their usage? Is it overly focusing on one thing and not another? And I think that's essential in order, because what people will expect of these things is constantly changing. They are growing, they're asking more of it, and you want to make sure you're always having evals that lead you to the future, not that reinforce the past.
I love that. This has been an awesome conversation. I feel like I love doing this stuff because I get to sit here and learn from people who have some of the stuff figured out. Let's do a couple rapid fire ones. Liz, starting with you, the future of search in just a few words. We'll make it hard for you.
Okay, just a few words. From information to intelligence.
I like that. That's a good one. Koray, new model capability you hope we're going to get in the next year.
Robotics.
Cool. I like that one. And Josh, biggest developer opportunity in the AI era right now?
I think people who never thought they could write code are going to write lots of code.
I like that. Awesome. Well, thank you all three for being here. This was a ton of fun to have. Hopefully folks got a behind the scenes look at some of the stuff that we're doing, what's coming next. There'll be another panel shortly after this with James Manika talking about the future of AI and science. So stick around for that. And thank you all for joining us at I/O this year.
Thank you.